Imagine a country so massive that entire European nations could disappear inside a single one of its provinces. A land with more lakes than the rest of the world combined. A place where Vikings arrived 5 centuries before Columbus, where French and British empires fought for control of an unforgiving wilderness, and where one railway nearly held an entire nation together. But the real story of Canada is not just about snow, maple syrup, or hockey. It is a story of survival against brutal winters, collapsing empires, gold rushes, rebellions, indigenous civilizations older than many European kingdoms, and a country that came dangerously close to breaking apart more than once. From Arctic tundra to megacities,
For most of human history, the land we now call Canada was not an empty frozen wilderness waiting to be discovered. It was already home to millions of people living in complex societies spread across forests, plains, mountains, and coastlines. Long before European maps even acknowledged the continent, indigenous nations like the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Cree, the Mi'kmaq, the Inuit, the Blackfoot, and many others had developed trade networks stretching thousands of kilometers across North America. Some communities followed migrating bison herds across the plains, while others built permanent settlements and managed rich fisheries along the Pacific coast. Survival in this environment required deep knowledge of the land, because Canada was not an easy place to live. Winters could freeze rivers solid for months. Summers brought swarms of insects and sudden wildfires, and distances between settlements were enormous. But these communities adapted so successfully that when Europeans finally arrived, they often depended on indigenous guides, diplomacy, and survival techniques just to stay alive. The first known Europeans to reach North America were not Columbus or the Spanish explorers usually taught in school, but Norse Vikings from Greenland and Iceland. Around the year 1000, Viking sailors established a small settlement at L'Anse aux Meadows in modern Newfoundland. Archaeologists discovered the remains of buildings, ironworking tools, and artifacts proving that Europeans reached North America nearly 500 years before Columbus. Yet the settlement never grew into a permanent colony. The Vikings likely struggled with supply lines, harsh conditions, and conflicts with local indigenous groups they called Scrowlings. Eventually, the outpost disappeared, becoming half history and half legend for centuries. By the late 1400s, Europe had entered the age of exploration, and the waters around Atlantic Canada suddenly became economically valuable. Fishermen from Portugal, France, and England discovered that the Grand Banks near Newfoundland contained some of the richest
hundreds, under leaders like Samuel de Champlain, who founded Quebec City in 1608. Champlain was not merely a conqueror planting flags. He understood that France could not dominate the region without alliances. He formed military and trade partnerships with several indigenous nations, especially groups hostile to the powerful Haudenosaunee Confederacy further south. These alliances pulled New France into a long cycle of warfare that reshaped the continent. Meanwhile, the fur trade exploded into one of the most profitable businesses in the world. European fashion turned beaver hats into luxury status symbols, and suddenly the forests of Canada became economically priceless. French voyageurs paddled enormous distances through rivers and lakes, carrying trade goods and returning with pelts. Entire cities in Europe were indirectly connected to Canadian wilderness routes. Montreal grew rich as a fur trading hub. But this trade transformed indigenous societies too. Access to European firearms changed the balance of power between nations. Epidemics brought by Europeans devastated communities that had no immunity to diseases like smallpox. In some regions, populations collapsed by more than half within generations. The demographic shock alone permanently altered North America before many Europeans had even seen the interior. At the same time, Britain expanded its own interests in the north through the Hudson's Bay Company, founded in 1670. The company controlled an enormous territory known as Rupert's Land, covering much of modern Canada. Unlike the French, who often built inland settlements and integrated more closely into existing trade systems, the Hudson's Bay Company initially relied on coastal trading posts where indigenous traders